Sergeant Sterling, his name patch perfectly stitched above a pocket stuffed with laminated inventory checklists, stood guard over an entire warehouse of cleaning supplies that Cabo Santos desperately needed. The air in the supply depot smelled of antiseptic and ozone, a clinical sterility that contrasted violently with the damp, gritty scent clinging to Santos's utility uniform. Sterling, immaculate down to the shine on his belt buckle, didn't bother to look up from his clipboard, his voice dripping with bored contempt as he dismissed her third request for industrial solvent. "Look, Cabo," Sterling drawled, finally tilting his head just enough to register her presence, his gaze lingering dismissively on the worn brass of her rank insignia. "This is high-grade maintenance issue, restricted inventory. We don't just hand out specialized degreaser to the help. You need the standard issue floor detergent, the green bucket by the incinerator. Use elbow grease. That's what you people are paid for." Santos gripped the worn wooden handle of her mop, its synthetic head slightly frayed. She didn't argue. She never argued. Her uniform, faded olive drab, bore the faint but persistent stains of engine grease, spent coffee, and the unique sterile grime that only accumulates in the sterile corridors of command structures. Her shoulders were slightly slumped, not in defeat, but in a perpetual exhaustion that no amount of sleep could remedy. "Sergeant," she replied, her voice low, a gravelly whisper that required effort to produce. "The hangar bay floor is saturated with hydraulic fluid. Standard issue will just spread it. It's a safety hazard. We need the solvent for proper decontamination before the next cycle inspection." Sterling sighed, a theatrical, long-suffering sound that echoed slightly off the metal shelving units. He placed his pen down with deliberate slowness, finally affording her his full sneering attention. He was a man defined by regulation, a petty tyrant whose authority peaked in the precise ordering of bulk consumables. "Hazard? Cabo, are you filing a formal complaint, or are you just trying to upgrade your cleaning kit?" He tapped the clipboard. "You want to talk about safety hazards? You're tracking mud and rust right onto my polished floor tile. Now, unless you can articulate the requirement using the approved requisition code, signed by a lieutenant or higher, I suggest you take your implement and go back to swabbing the deck. You're holding up real business." He paused, letting his eyes sweep over her once more, finding the precise spot of maximum condescension. "Frankly, Cabo, I'm wondering why they even let you near anything more complicated than a bucket. What is your actual background? Just tell me your rank, what you are, and get out of my sight." Santos swallowed the acid burning in her throat. She could feel the stares of the two young PFCs stacking boxes nearby. They were rookies, barely out of basic, and they were snickering quietly into their collars. Sterling's dismissal was complete, absolute, and designed to strip her of any remaining dignity. The immediate sting of the insult was dull, distant. It felt like receiving a mosquito bite after surviving a grenade blast, because standing there, smelling the antiseptic, the familiar, suffocating contempt of a man who measured his life in paperwork, her mind involuntarily retreated. It always retreated when the pressure mounted, sinking back into the only place that truly made sense: the dust, the heat, the silent, terrifying calculus of 3 years prior. Fob Chapman. The name was a scar, visible only to her. She wasn't Cabo Santos, the maintenance worker then. She was Specialist Santos. Elevated temporary rank. Operational necessity. She wore the rank of Cabo now as a deliberate mask, a form of self-imposed witness protection. She needed to disappear into the mundane, to trade the unbearable weight of responsibility for the simple, solvable problem of spilled oil. The memory began with the heat. Not just temperature, but the oppressive, physical presence of the sun beating down on the corrugated iron roof of the observation post overlooking the contested valley outside Kandahar. It was 130 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, and easily 150 degrees inside the blind. She had been lying prone for 7 continuous hours, the synthetic mat sticky with sweat, the air thick with the smell of old canvas and spent brass. Her weapon was the Barrett M107A1, chambered in 50 BMG, a beast of a rifle designed not just for precision, but for terminal mass transfer. It was a tool of geometric cruelty, and at 30.5 pounds unloaded, it demanded absolute physical mastery. She had named it the Carpenter, because its job was to build silence. Her immediate mission was counter-sniper interdiction, But her true function was protection. 4 men, a forward air controller, 2 security forces members, and a combat medic, were pinned down approximately 1,600 meters away, trapped in a narrow ravine after their patrol vehicle hit an IED. They were exposed, taking sporadic but accurate fire from a ridgeline far outside the effective range of their own organic weapons. The first few hours were characterized by excruciating stillness. She monitored the variables: wind speed, shifting 8 to 15 knots, full value; temperature, affecting powder burn rate; humidity, minimal, but critical; and the subtle, incessant vibration of the generator 50 meters behind her. She had already calculated the solution for 1,600 meters. The elevation hold was 42 minutes of angle, but at that distance, the true enemy was not the insurgent. It was the Earth itself. She had to account for the Coriolis effect, the deflection caused by the rotation of the planet. For a half-ton projectile in the northern hemisphere, moving southeast, the bullet would drift perceptibly right. At 1,600 meters, that was nearly half a meter of drift. And then there was spin drift, the small lateral deviation caused by the rifling twist. She etched the numbers into the dust next to her cheekpiece, the data overwhelming her senses, pushing everything else: fear, thirst, exhaustion, into a distant, muffled echo. Control, this is Specialist 9 Echo. Wind is holding. Reading 5 contacts, 1,620 meters. Vicinity grid Delta 37. Confirmed spotter and primary rifle. Engaging. Requesting fire priority confirmation. Her voice was monotone, disciplined. The radio crackled back with static and urgency. 9 Echo. Confirmed contacts are engaging Team Alpha. They just lost the medic's comms. We need the threat suppressed now. Affirmative. Control. They are sighted in. 1 moment. She pressed her eye to the Schmidt and Bender PM2 scope, the world flattening into high-contrast shades of tan and brown. She could see the spotter, a flicker of movement near a jumble of granite boulders, relaying data to the primary shooter, who was partially concealed by a low scrub bush. The shooter had an old, long-barreled SVD, notoriously effective at range against unarmored targets. The issue wasn't hitting a man. The issue was hitting the right man, accounting for the microvariables in the 3 seconds the projectile would take to travel. She adjusted the M107A1's bipod ever so slightly, the metal scraping faintly on the concrete. She inhaled slowly, completely filling her lungs, then exhaled to the half point, stabilizing her heart rate. She held the breath. Everything faded to the crosshairs. The image was perfectly clear, magnified 25 times. She centered the crosshair not on the target's center mass, but 3.5 meters above and 40 centimeters left, correcting for the full external ballistics profile. Squeeze. The muzzle blast was a physical blow, a concussive shockwave that momentarily dislocated her world. The dust and smoke immediately obscured her vision, a curtain of pulverized earth and burning cordite. The recoil, even mitigated by the massive muzzle brake, slammed her shoulder, forcing the dislocated AC joint, a chronic injury from a previous mission, to grind agonizingly against the socket. She wrenched her head back to the observation aperture just in time to see the effect through the dust cloud. The target was gone. The boulder behind where the spotter had been was sprayed with pink mist and fragmented granite. Impact confirmed. Spotter neutralized. Primary shooter is repositioning. Requesting status check on Alpha Team. Alpha is reporting momentary cessation of fire, but the shooter is moving to a better position. Hurry, 9 Echo. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the brutal physics of the weapon. She racked the bolt, the heavy mechanical action of cycling a 50 BMG round. Clack chunk. The sound was deafeningly close. The new round seated perfectly in the chamber. She had 5 more chances before she had to reload the bulky magazine. The primary insurgent shooter was now visible, using the brief silence to sprint toward a dry irrigation ditch, a position that would give him complete cover and an improved firing angle on the pinned-down Americans. This was no longer a calculation. This was instinct, a brutal snap decision based on muscle memory honed over thousands of dry fire hours. She had maybe 4 seconds before he reached cover. She reacquired the target, estimated the lead for a moving target at 1,650 meters, factoring in his speed, approximately 10 km/h. The lead necessary was immense. She had to aim 6 body lengths ahead of him. She held the crosshairs in open air, relying purely on the internal map of velocity, gravity, and trajectory burned into her nervous system. She pressed the trigger, controlling the breath that felt like sandpaper in her lungs. The second shot. The sound was even sharper, more urgent. This time, the projectile impacted approximately half a meter behind the shooter. Dust erupted. She cursed silently. The lead calculation was wrong. The shooter was faster than estimated, or the wind had dropped momentarily. The shot had missed, but provided a near-miss concussion. The insurgent startled, stumbled, and fell, dropping his SVD. He scrambled toward the ditch, panicked, exposed. She didn't hesitate. She adjusted the scope rapidly, sighting onto the stationary target where he had fallen. He was trying to crawl the remaining 10 feet. She didn't adjust for Coriolis or spin drift this time. She simply aimed for the center of his visible torso and fired the third round. The shot landed true. The sound was instantly replaced by the confirmation. The radio immediately flared with panicked Pashto chatter on the open frequency the team had been monitoring, followed by the stunned relief of her control officer. 9 Echo, status confirmed suppression. Alpha team is moving, confirming no further hostile engagement. Unbelievable 9 Echo. Stand by for extract. She lowered the rifle, the massive barrel steaming in the desert heat. She tried to move her right arm, but the dislocated joint screamed a blinding white pain. She rolled onto her back, gulping the hot, stale air. She was covered in grit and sweat, her ears ringing with the high-pitched, permanent whine of severe tinnitus, a souvenir of the concussive blasts. But the relief was chemical and overwhelming. 4 lives secured. The subsequent 3 days were a blur of immediate medical evacuation, debriefings, and the heavy metallic silence of the aftermath. She had achieved the impossible. 2 kill shots at near maximal effective range, under extreme pressure, saving an entire fire team. For that action, executed outside the conventional lines of combat, she was nominated for, and later quietly awarded, the Medal of Valor. Not the Silver Star, which recognized conspicuous gallantry in action, but the Medal of Valor, which specifically recognized actions that saved lives at extreme personal risk, actions that often fell outside the neat parameters of battle documentation. She received the medal in a muted ceremony, far from the cameras, insisted upon by the command structure to keep her identity protected, given the counter-sniper nature of her work. She also received the Purple Heart for the resulting physical trauma, the permanently damaged shoulder, the lasting nerve damage in her fingers from the extreme recoil absorption, and the chronic, debilitating migraines. But the medals were a burden. They felt like weights dragging her down, symbols of a life she couldn't outrun. The accolades were meaningless when measured against the perpetual taste of cordite and the ghostly imprint of the men she saved. She couldn't stay in the fight. The weight of the Barrett, the precision required, the consequence of every single squeeze of the trigger, it had broken something fundamental inside her. She requested transfer after transfer, finally settling for the most obscure, repetitive, and least consequential role she could find: maintenance and facilities. She needed the physical repetition, the simplicity of solving problems with a bucket and mop, the anonymity of the Cabo rank. She became Santos, the janitor, the ghost of Fob Chapman walking the corridors of this secure, clean rear echelon base. The memory, detailed, agonizing, and raw, took less than 3 seconds to flash through her mind as Sterling's voice finally pierced the haze. "Is your rank? Are you even authorized to be in this area, Yo Cabo?" Sterling leaned forward, tapping the clipboard rhythmically against his palm. "Because if you can't tell me your full designation, I'm going to have security escort you out, and you can explain why you were bothering supply without proper authorization. Now answer me, soldier. What is your rank?" The moment was perfect, sterile, and maddeningly petty. Cabo Santos was about to accept the dismissal, about to turn away, retrieve her substandard bucket, and retreat into her world of chemical odors and silence. But the moment did not belong to her. The door to the supply depot, a heavy, sound-dampening slab of reinforced steel, hissed open behind Sterling. The sound of the boots was the first indication, not the heavy, methodical thud of standard-issue combat boots, but the quiet, controlled tock-tock of bespoke high-end tactical footwear designed for maximum stealth and precision movement. Every single person in the depot, Sterling, the 2 snickering PFCs, and even Santos, froze. The man who entered was the physical embodiment of lethal efficiency. He wore non-standard issue tactical gear, desert multicam, tailored perfectly to his lean, powerful frame. His helmet was a high-cut model, the carbon shell bristling with communications gear and night vision mounts, though the lenses were flipped up. His face, partially obscured by dark ballistic glasses, was impassive, dominated by a jawline that looked carved from granite. He was clearly not part of the standard base personnel. His uniform carried no conspicuous rank insignia, save for the single, small American flag patch on his shoulder. His presence filled the air with a potent, almost chemical tension, the scent of ozone and the subtle, lingering odor of gun oil and suppressors. He was the kind of operator who only moved when his presence was absolutely required, and he moved with the predatory grace of something fully aware of its own lethality. Slung across his chest, perfectly positioned for immediate deployment, was an HK-4A16 assault rifle. It wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was an extension of his will. The weapon was pristine, meticulously maintained, equipped with a short barrel, a custom suppressor, and an array of high-end optics. The operator paused 5 feet behind Sterling. He didn't make a sound, yet his arrival crushed the atmosphere of petty dominance Sterling had manufactured. Sterling, recognizing the shift in dynamic but not the sheer danger, straightened his shoulders, puffing out his chest slightly. Supply sergeants often felt invincible in their domain. "Sir," Sterling said, attempting a respectful salute that wobbled slightly. "Can I help you? This area is restricted access for non-supply personnel. Do you have a requisition form or clearance?" The operator didn't acknowledge Sterling verbally. He simply tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over the supply sergeant. A look of profound, silent scrutiny. It was the look of a hawk assessing a field mouse. Then, his eyes settled on Cabo Santos. Santos, still gripping her mop, felt the weight of that gaze. It was neither judgmental nor pitying. It was professional recognition. The kind of look exchanged between people who have both seen the exact same shade of black. The operator spoke, his voice low, trained to cut through battlefield noise but perfectly modulated here. It was the first sound he had made, and it demanded obedience. "Sergeant Sterling," the operator said, the name pronounced with a precise, chilling formality. "Step away from the Cabo." Sterling blinked, his confidence cracking. "Sir, I was just addressing a disciplinary matter. She's requesting specialized solvent without proper documentation, and frankly, her bearing." I said, "Step away." The operator's tone hardened, the subtle command authority tightening like a vice. Sterling immediately flinched, recognizing the inherent power structure. This man was not his superior in rank, perhaps, but certainly in consequence. He took one step back, bumping awkwardly into a stack of requisition boxes. The operator walked past him, stopping directly in front of Cabo Santos. Sterling watched, baffled as the elite soldier ignored him completely. The operator extended his hand, palm up, toward Santos. "Cabo," he said, the voice softening just a fraction, registering respect. "May I see your ID card, please?" Santos, her heart hammering against her ribs, reached into her uniform pocket with her left hand, her fingers stiff and slightly arthritic from the old trauma. She produced the laminated ID, its photo faded, the data chip embedded in the corner. The operator took it, his movements fluid and economical. He flipped the card over, scanning the back. He didn't look at her face or her uniform. He looked at the tiny embossed codes and notations, the non-public markers that documented true service history. A silence descended upon the depot, thick and absolute. The 2 PFCs stopped stacking boxes, staring openly. Sterling stood rigid, his chest deflating, realizing that this situation was rapidly moving outside the jurisdiction of his clipboard. The operator held the card for a long moment. Then he raised his head, his ballistic glasses catching the fluorescent light. He spoke, not to Santos, but addressing the depot, his voice carrying the authority of a general addressing a formation. He was performing a ceremonial act, making sure everyone understood the consequence of the moment. "The soldier standing before you," the operator announced, his voice devoid of emotion, "is Cabo Santos, formerly Specialist Santos. Her operational file contains documentation of her service in Afghanistan, 2018 to 2020. He paused, letting the reality sink in. Then he began to read, his voice amplifying slightly, listing the achievements that Santos had desperately tried to bury. Citation, 12th of June, 2019. Fob Chapman, Counter-Sniper Interdiction, awarded the Medal of Valor, the highest non-combat decoration for saving lives, recognizing extraordinary performance under conditions of extreme duress, leading to the preservation of 4 Allied personnel. Sterling's face, which had been confused, now began to drain of color. His jaw dropped slightly. The Medal of Valor. Not for fighting, but for saving. The operator continued, turning the card to read the smaller print, detailing the costs of that valor. Wounds sustained in action, requiring medical evacuation and specialized surgery. Severe AC joint dislocation, resulting in permanent 30% mobility loss in the right arm. Chronic tinnitus and concussion symptoms. Awarded the Purple Heart, 1st Oak Leaf Cluster. The depot was utterly still. The two young PFCs looked from the operator to the woman with the mop handle, their expressions shifting from mockery to awe. Sterling's meticulously ordered world was imploding. The woman he had called the Help, the one he had dismissed as too simple to handle complex supplies, carried scars and medals that defined the very apex of military sacrifice. The operator lowered the ID card slowly, placing it gently back into Santos's outstretched palm. He didn't meet her eyes, a gesture of respect toward her anonymity. Then he performed the final, extraordinary act. He reached across his chest and deftly unclipped the sling from his HK-416. The rifle, the symbol of his operational identity, the piece of equipment upon which his life and the lives of his team depended, was now free. He held the HK-416 by the receiver, the suppressor pointed safely toward the floor. He offered the weapon, his personal instrument of war, sacred and irreplaceable, to Cabo Santos. "Cabo," the operator said, his voice now a quiet, deep affirmation of respect. "Hold this for me." The action was seismic. In the military culture, particularly within elite units, the primary weapon is never, under any circumstances, casually handed to another person, especially not in a non-combat zone. It is the ultimate expression of trust, a recognition of shared danger and profound capability. It was more than a salute. It was a transference of honor. Santos's eyes widened slightly, the first visible break in her controlled demeanor. She understood the weight of the gesture instantly. This was not a weapon being borrowed. It was a legacy being momentarily shared. She instinctively dropped the mop, the wooden handle clattering against the linoleum floor, the sound harsh and inappropriate in the sudden reverent silence. She reached out with her left hand, her stronger, non-traumatized hand, and accepted the HK-416. The moment the rifle settled into her grasp was an experience defined by sensory detail. The weapon was cold, perfectly balanced. She felt the smooth, matte finish of the anodized aluminum receiver and the subtle texture of the polymer pistol grip. She smelled the faint, lingering scent of lubricant, burnt propellant, and steel, the precise, specific odor of a weapon recently and effectively used in combat. She held the rifle with a natural, ingrained familiarity, her left hand wrapping around the foregrip, fingers automatically checking the safety selector, an instantaneous, unconscious assessment of the weapon's readiness. The operator looked directly at Sergeant Sterling, who was now visibly trembling, his face a sickening shade of gray. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by the terror of a man who had committed an unforgivable social and military blunder. "Sergeant Sterling," the operator articulated, his voice now low and dangerous. "This soldier is not the Help. She is a protector, a recipient of the Medal of Valor, and she has proven, beyond any reasonable doubt, her capacity to save the lives of those who hold the line. She requires specialized cleaning solvent for a specific documented safety hazard. You will provide her with the required material immediately, and you will ensure she receives any and all logistical support she needs, without delay, hesitation, or bureaucratic obstruction." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that nevertheless carried clearly in the silent depot. "And if you ever refer to a decorated soldier of the United States Armed Forces as the Help again, I will personally ensure your next duty station is scrubbing latrines in the most remote, unpleasant place this command structure can find. Do you understand your instructions, Sergeant?" Sterling could barely speak, his lips parted, struggling to form the simple affirmation. Yes, sir. Understood, sir." The two young PFCs, who had watched the entire exchange, instinctively snapped to attention, their backs rigid, gazing with newfound respect at the Cabo standing silently holding the elite operator's rifle. The sound of their boots clicking together was the final confirmation of the shift in power. The operator turned back to Santos. She still held the HK-416, the massive weight of the M107A1 replaced by the contained lethality of the carbine. She looked down at the weapon, perhaps seeing not the mechanism, but the shared burden of purpose. She lifted her eyes to the operator, a single brief nod passing between them, a recognition that bypassed rank and bureaucracy. She extended the rifle back to him. The operator took the HK-416 back, the seamless transition marking the end of the ceremony. He re-slung the rifle across his chest, the weapon returning to its master. He glanced at Sterling one last time, a look of utter professional disdain. Ensure the materials are delivered to the hangar bay, personally, by the sergeant, within the next 5 minutes. Failure to comply is a direct disciplinary action. Then, without another word or glance, the operator turned and walked out of the depot, the steel door hissing shut behind him, leaving silence and the ruined dignity of Sergeant Sterling. Sterling stood frozen for a full minute, utterly defeated, looking physically smaller than before. Finally, he sagged, gripping the edge of a shelf for support. Cabo Santos bent down, retrieved her mop, and straightened up. Her demeanor had not changed. She was still tired, still humble, but the weight of the world, for this brief, perfect moment, had been lifted. She looked at Sterling, who avoided her gaze. "Sergeant," she said, her voice quiet, but steady now. "The solvent, please." Sterling jumped, scrambling immediately to the restricted inventory. He didn't send a PFC. He personally retrieved the correct high-grade solvent, logging it out with shaking hands, avoiding her eyes the entire time. He loaded the heavy industrial container onto a small dolly. I'll accompany you, Cabo," he stammered, pulling the dolly toward the door. "To the hangar bay, to ensure compliance." Cabo Santos simply nodded, adjusted her grip on the mop and walked out of the supply depot, following the disgraced sergeant who was now hauling her supplies. She was back to her job, back to the mop, but the burden she carried was lighter, her secret affirmed by the ultimate recognition. The ghosts of F.O.B. Chapman had finally been acknowledged in the sterile halls of bureaucracy. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.